All right. So, still on the topic of sins of omission, cue dependent forgetting. When we have poor retrieval cues, we are very unlikely to accurately retrieve information from our memories. Our memories, in order to pull things out, really require cues that will help us to not only recall part of the memory, but like all of it, right? We want all the details that go along with the memory. So, thinking back to the little exercise that we did before, without looking at the list that you wrote earlier, write down as many words as you can from that list that you created earlier. So the words that you wrote down are the ones that you're going to try and remember right now. So go ahead and pause me and write down as many words as you can from that list. Any order, by the way. All right, hopefully you're back. Hopefully you're playing my game and you actually did it and wrote down as many words as you can. Didn't peek. It's always easier to remember things when you just go ahead and look at the list. So now I want you to do another recall. And this time I'm going to have this slide up, and now you have the prompts. So go ahead and try the same exercise again and write down every word that you can remember now with these prompts as cues. So go ahead and pause me and do that. All right, so hopefully you did it. Hopefully you're playing along. It's way more fun to see things actually happening in your own memory than it is to just hear about memory research. So compare the accuracy of your two lists to your original list. So open up your cue list now. Look at that first set of items that you wrote down just from free recall. Look at the list that you created with the cues in front of you. I'm just going to go out on a limb and guess that you did better in the second situation when you had the cues. But here's an interesting question. What type of memory was measured in each of those memory tests? I accidentally said the word a second ago that describes the first version, which was free recall, right? I just said, write down as many words as you can remember from the list. So that free recall means that you have to generate possible options, decide whether each option belongs on the list or not, and then ultimately write down an answer. Whereas the cued recall test, which was the second example, you had the exact same cues that caused you to generate the list in the first place. So probably you did way better on that second list. Now there are other memory strategies that we could have used to elicit efficient memory. Like perhaps I could have had a recognition test, which would be tricky since you generated your own list. Now that would have been a tricky one for me to be able to do. But there are lots of things that we could have done to elicit memory, but in this particular scenario, I think this is about the only way you could have done it. Now Bauer, you may have seen him in the textbook, Gordon Bauer, he was really famous for using hypnosis as a way to elicit different kinds of memories from people. And one of the things that he warned people about back in the 1960s, warned psychologists about, is the ability for hypnosis to, I'll put in quotation marks, retrieve so-called repressed memories, right? That hypnosis can cause a participant or a hypnotized person to believe that they've retrieved an actual memory when in fact they didn't. They just internalized the suggestion of the hypnotist. And so Bauer said, we really have to be careful about that. And that's going to be really relevant as we're going on in this chapter. We're going to talk about repressed memories. So a little foreshadowing. All right, cue-dependent forgetting. One of the things that happens when the cues are inadequate is that we will experience what's called the tip of the tongue phenomenon. I just had it yesterday. I was trying to think of, now I can't remember the word I wanted again, but the word advantageous kept hopping into my mind and I could not think of the word that I wanted. And now I can't even remember what the word I wanted was. It starts with an A. It is not advantageous. It was something else. And I had to define it. And my son actually gave me the name. And then I was so relieved. I actually now have forgotten what the word was. Here we have an example where an older kid is talking to like a 5-year-old and says to the 5-year-old, hey, can I borrow some, what is that word? And he goes, you cut with these things. And the younger kid goes, like an X-Acto knife? And the older kid goes, no, they look like this. And it's doing the little scissoring motion with their fingers. And the little kid goes, a peace sign? The older kid goes, man, this is embarrassing. 5-year-olds know this word. And the little kid's like, bunny ears that wiggle, right? Trying to guess from the hand gesture. That's the kind of experience that you have with the tip of the tongue phenomenon. And what's happening there is that what's out in the environment is inadequate to produce the memory that you want. And the spreading activation in your brain is taking you down the wrong pathway to retrieve what you want. Like, why was I thinking the word advantageous? And why is that one coming to me so easily today too? And I couldn't go down the other A word, that I was trying to generate. What was blocking me from that? It was probably something inside of my own head, right? Something else that, was causing me to go down the one path. And that can be the source of the tip of the tongue phenomenon. You may have had this experience trying to think of somebody's name. And a lot of times I try and think of somebody's name. I'll be, for example, describing a movie I saw, and I'll say, oh, it had that actress, man, what's her name? She has dark hair. Yeah, that's all I got. I can't even describe her any better than that. Okay, never mind. I give up. I can't tell you about the movie I saw because I can't even think of the actress's name. The second I walk away or hang up the phone, I'm like, it was Demi Moore or whoever I was thinking of, right? The second the pressure is off to retrieve the item that you're looking for, it releases whatever this cueing block is, and suddenly you can remember what you were trying to say. Which is a really interesting aspect of the tip of the tongue phenomenon. Researchers have been trying to figure out, what does it take to release that block? That, what suddenly makes that go away so that now the cues are adequate, that now you can actually recall what you're trying to recall. And we don't have clear, it varies, right? So we don't have a clear answer to that. It varies depending on the situation and the word that you're trying to think of and a whole bunch of other things. All right, so we have covered the sins of omission. So now in the sins of commission, we have bias, persistence, misattribution, and suggestibility. So let's dive into the sins of commission. Bias. So let's say that you were shown this little line drawing, and these little line drawings. Okay. And let's say that on the top one, you were told it's supposed to depict a gun, or it's supposed to depict a broom. And the one in the middle, you were told it's supposed to depict eyeglasses, or it's supposed to depict dumbbells. It's the number 7, or it's the number 4. Once you've been provided with a cue, so, if you were in the condition where the top one, you were told that's supposed to be a gun, when you're asked to actually draw the item, you draw it in such a way that it looks more like a gun. So you're going to produce the image, something more like what's on the left. If you were told those are supposed to be eyeglasses, you'll draw something more like what's on the left. If you were told it's supposed to be a 7, you'll draw something more like what's on the left. And then, with the other cues, you draw something more like what's on the right. And they have found this very consistently. I mean, they use line drawings because most of us are not going to say that we're great artists and, oh no, I'm inhibited, I can't, don't make me do this. And so they use really simple line drawings. And then what they look for is if the person modifies the line drawing from memory, you're not looking at that ambiguous item, that ambiguous figure anymore. You're drawing it from memory, but you've been biased. And so by the terms that were provided, and so your bias causes you to retrieve details about the original ambiguous stimulus that are consistent with your bias. I was just watching something on TV, and I don't recall what it was, but they were, it was a court case, and they said that the house had recording devices and things in it because the woman lived alone. Her ex-husband was scaring her, and so she had recording devices and things in the house. The recording device picked up her husband there at the house, like the videotape picked him up, and then the audio recording picked him up saying something. that really was uninterpretable, honestly. I mean, they played it several times, and without any context, I couldn't figure out what he was supposed to be saying. But the prosecutor said, didn't you just whisper, this bitch is going to pay for that? And he goes, no, I don't think that's what I don't know what I said, and denied it. But once the prosecutor said it, it clearly is what he said. Like, once the prosecutor gave me an interpretation of what he had said, I'm like, oh yeah, I can hear it now, right? And that's the problem with offering that kind of, biasing information. It was truly ambiguous. It was unclear what the guy said. And then the prosecutor gave us an interpretation. And now it's like you can't unhear it. It sounds like what he said. That's what we mean by these kinds of sins of commission, where you're biased. And now for the people who heard the word eyeglasses, they will always remember the stimulus looking more like what they drew on the left-hand side. They would reject the diagram that's on the far right. They'd be like, no, that's not what it looked like. It looked like this, right? Like, how could you have drawn it like that? It was clearly eyeglasses, right? So they will remember the details that they added on to the original ambiguous stimulus. They'll remember those details as if they're part of the original stimulus. And there's no way that you can really convince them otherwise until you show them the original stimulus. And then they'll say, well, that's weird. Well, see, I mean, it does look like eyeglasses, right? Or, oh, look, it does look like a broom. This is why I just put extra straws on it. But it does look like a broom. And they'll justify. It's not because I'm biased. It's because it does inherently look like what I drew. So that's really a risky part of our memory, isn't it? Because it shows that we are subject to modifying what really happened and adding on to our memories, that top-down processing, so that we become completely convinced that our biased memory is in fact what happened. And so that can be really risky. Another sin of commission is persistence, which may be a form of interference, but it really gives us a lot of insight into how people organize their memories. Persistence suggests the kinds of preoccupations we're carrying around with us, the kinds of things that we're thinking about or are worried about, things like that. So Freud called these Freudian slips, but slips of the tongue, the lawyer is saying, it was a slip of the tongue. I didn't mean to call you your alleged honor. Slips of the tongue are, according to cognitive psychology, an indication of something that you're thinking about, something that's competing with what you're trying to utter right now or do right now. So you can imagine that, especially if this is a defense attorney, he's probably been trying to say alleged between every word because he doesn't want the jury to think that it's a done deal, that his client has done the crime. So accidentally calling the judge your alleged honor, that would be consistent with the preoccupation that he's having of don't forget to say alleged before everything, right? Now Freud would say it's a sign that the lawyer has, contempt for the judge. And I think that's the interpretation the judge is taking in this cartoon, right? That what the lawyer's really thinking is that this isn't a real judge and I don't have to be respectful because this is just your alleged honor, right? So Freud would say that there's much more, sign of repressed feelings or whatever going on here. But cognitive psychologists would say he's just preoccupied with that. Now, here's another example of a Spoonerism. Spoonerisms can be where you switch the order of words within a sentence. So when you're going to the grocery store to buy your groceries and you say, okay, I'm going to go get a lamb of leg and a 10-pound dog of bag food. That would be an example of a Spoonerism, as well as mixing two words together. So Spoonerisms are any time that you're sort of having these slips of the tongue that are indicative that you're sort of anticipating what's going to come next in the sentence. You might have heard me do a little bit of a Spoonerism when I shifted slides in the last lecture and the picture said positivity. And I started to say, I don't remember what word I was starting to say, but I accidentally started to add ivity onto the end of it, but I fixed it pretty fast. I heard myself doing it, and so I stopped. But you hear that a lot when people are talking off the cuff and they see something, they may start to incorporate that into what they're saying. Or if they're thinking about something else, they may accidentally incorporate that into what they're saying. Or if they're anticipating the word that's coming next, they may accidentally blend words or reorganize words in the sentence. All right, that's a perfect time to stop. We'll come back in the next segment. We'll start with misattribution.